More than 5,000 years ago, a man vanished from the face of the earth. He didn't die. He wasn't murdered. He didn't get lost in the desert. One day he was here, walking among his own, and the next he was gone, as if someone had ripped him from this dimension with their hand. The Bible dedicates exactly 2 verses to this event. 2. For one of the greatest mysteries in all of human history. His name was Enoch. And what he saw before disappearing was so disturbing, so revealing, so dangerous, that someone decided you were not supposed to know about it. But today, you're going to know. There is a book, a manuscript so ancient it was written before the Great Flood. A text, the apostles knew, that Jude quoted word for word in the New Testament, that the early church read for 300 years as sacred scripture. And that later, without public explanation, without open debate, without a recorded vote, was ripped from your Bible. Someone determined these pages were too dangerous for your eyes. And that decision forever changed what you know about heaven, about hell, and about what awaits humanity at the end of times. But there's something more, something no one has told you yet. This book contains a description of the Messiah that was written thousands of years before Bethlehem, thousands of years before the manger, thousands of years before the cross, and when you read it, you'll understand exactly why it was hidden. Prepare yourself, because what comes next you won't find in any church, in any seminary, in any Sunday school. But it is documented, verified, and preserved despite every attempt to destroy it. But before showing you what Enoch saw in the heavens, I need you to understand something fundamental, something without which the rest of this story doesn't carry the weight it should. I need you to understand the world from which Enoch was taken, because that world bears no resemblance to yours. None. Not even 1%. The earth before the flood was a place that would make the most extreme horror movie you've ever seen fall short. A place where the supernatural and the natural coexisted without a visible border, where celestial beings walked among men with the same normalcy with which you walk to the supermarket, where what you would call impossible today, what you would dismiss as fantasy, what a 21st century scientist would call absurd, was the everyday, verifiable reality of every family, every tribe, every village on the face of the earth. And Enoch was born in the 7th generation from Adam. And here comes the first piece of data that demolishes everything you think you know. Adam was still alive when Enoch was born, the first man, the one who was molded with the direct hands of God from the dust of the earth, the one who walked in Eden, the one who heard the voice of the Creator every evening among the trees of the garden. That Adam was still breathing when Enoch opened his eyes for the first time. We're not talking about legends passed down through generations. Enoch could sit in front of Adam, look him in the eyes, and ask him directly, what was paradise like? What did God's voice sound like? What did perfection feel like before everything broke? But what Enoch saw every day upon leaving his tent was exactly the opposite of paradise. Something was happening in the mountains, something no one could explain, something that made the elders tremble and the women weep. On the highest peaks, where the mist blended with the clouds, where the air was so thin it was hard to breathe, 200 beings descended from heaven. They didn't fall, they weren't expelled. They descended voluntarily, with full awareness of what they were doing, with a plan that would destroy all of humanity. The book calls them the Watchers, egregoroi in Greek, Irim in Aramaic, angels of the highest rank that God had assigned to a single task, to observe humanity from the heights, to guard the border between heaven and earth. But one day they looked down, and they saw the daughters of men, and they desired them, and what they did next unleashed the worst disaster in the history of creation. Their leader was named Semyaza, and the manuscript records his exact words. He told the 200, "I fear that you may not be willing to carry this out, and that I alone will bear the punishment for this great sin." And the 200 answered him, Let us all swear with an oath that we will not change our plan." And they descended. Where? On Mount Hermon, the summit that to this day bears engraved in its name the memory of that cursed pact. Hermon comes from the Hebrew root herem, which means anathema, irrevocable curse. The mountain itself is a monument to the rebellion. 4,500 meters of height, marked forever by what happened on its summit that night. If you had been there, this is what you would have seen: the night sky tearing open at 200 simultaneous points of light. The air crackling with an energy that made bones vibrate inside the flesh. A sound that wasn't thunder, but made the rocks of the summit tremble. And then 200 figures of light materializing on the stone, with faces of a beauty that no human being had ever seen outside of Eden, with eyes that burned with a fire not of this world. Mount Hermon lit up that night as if the sun had decided to rise at midnight, and the few humans who lived in the valley villages looked up and felt something they had never felt before, a terror mixed with fascination that paralyzed them where they stood. The watchers looked at the earth they were stepping on for the first time with corporeal feet. They felt the cold of the stone. They smelled the mountain air thick with moisture and minerals. They heard the wind whistle through the rocks. And for the first time in their eternal existence, they experienced physical sensations, and those sensations intoxicated them, like a drug that acts on first contact. And they knew in that instant that there would be no turning back. The heaven they had left was now a memory, and the earth was their new reality. But what they did upon arriving was infinitely worse than taking human wives. What they did next changed the course of civilization forever, and we are still living with its consequences today. Azazel, one of the most powerful leaders among the 200, taught men to manufacture swords, knives, shields, and breastplates of war. But not like a blacksmith teaches another blacksmith. He taught them advanced metallurgy, smelting techniques that humanity would not have discovered on its own for thousands of years. He showed them how to extract iron from rocks that seemed ordinary, how to temper it at precise temperatures to create edges that could cut bone as if it were butter, how to mold alloys that didn't oxidize, weapons that transformed tribal disputes over grazing territory into organized massacres on an industrial scale. Before Azazel, men fought with stones and sticks. Fights ended with bruises and broken bones, but rarely with death. After Azazel, a single man with a bronze sword could kill 20 in an afternoon. The mortality rate from violence multiplied by a factor that the text doesn't quantify, but whose consequences make evident. The earth was filled with blood. And that was just the beginning, because Azazel didn't stop at weapons. He taught women the art of cosmetics, the pigments extracted from minerals that humanity didn't know existed. Dyes for the lips, the eyelids, the cheeks. Precious stones that could be cut and polished to create ornaments that captured sunlight in ways that hypnotized, not out of innocent vanity. The text is clear. This knowledge was designed as tools of seduction and manipulation, to corrupt relationships, to awaken greed, to turn natural beauty into a weapon of social control. He also taught them to extract precious metals from the bowels of the earth, gold, silver, stones that God had sealed beneath the surface for a specific reason, metals that were kept for a time that had not yet come. But Azazel tore them out prematurely, like someone who tears an unripe fruit from the tree, and the result was poisoning instead of nourishment. And Azazel was just one of the 200, and the rest were not far behind. Other watchers taught astrology, not the reverent contemplation of the Creator's stars, the manipulation of destiny through reading the constellations, divination techniques that claim to reveal the future without needing to consult the one who created the future. They taught sorcery and enchantments, specific formulas for invoking dark forces that had existed since before material creation, words of power that, spoken in the correct sequence, could alter the will of other people. could cause disease, could provoke false love or true hatred. They revealed the secrets of roots and plants to create undetectable poisons that killed slowly, and potions that altered the perception of reality in ways we would call psychedelic today. And each of the 200 contributed their area of celestial expertise to a coordinated, systematic, deliberate program to destroy the human race through its own artificial evolution. And here is the bitterest irony of this entire story. Humanity received all that knowledge, believing the Watchers were doing them a favor, that they were elevating them, that they were liberating them from their limitations. The Watchers were received as benefactor gods, as liberators, as the ones who finally gave humanity the tools to reach its true potential. Exactly the same narrative you hear today when someone tells you that technology will solve all problems, that progress is inevitable and always positive, that any moral limit is an archaic obstacle preventing the advancement of the species. The humanity before the flood bought that narrative completely, and it destroyed itself. Imagine this: humanity was barely learning to walk, barely beginning to build the most basic rudiments of civilization, and suddenly it received a tsunami of advanced knowledge for which it was not prepared even 1%. It's like giving a nuclear bomb to a 3-year-old child. Knowledge without the moral maturity to manage it doesn't liberate. It destroys. And what came next was worse, much worse. From the union between these celestial beings and human women, creatures were born that should never have existed. The Nephilim, giants. The text says they measured 300 cubits. For reference, that's approximately 135 meters, taller than a 40-story building. In hybrid beings of superhuman strength and insatiable appetite that belonged neither to heaven nor to earth. That had no place in any order created by God. Biological abominations resulting from the forbidden mixture of the celestial and the terrestrial. And here is where the story becomes truly terrifying. When the Nephilim grew, their appetite grew with them. First, they devoured the herds of men. Thousands of animals each day weren't enough. The fields were left empty. The fishing rivers dried up. The granaries were emptied in weeks of what should have lasted years. And when the food ran out, when the fields and herds and reserves couldn't sate their colossal hunger for even an instant, the Nephilim did the unthinkable. They began to devour human beings, literally. The text doesn't use metaphors. It's not poetry. It's not symbolism. It says they ate the flesh of men and drank their blood. Entire villages disappeared overnight, whole families, entire generations erased from existence. The horror was daily. Mothers hid their children in caves. Fathers built underground shelters that lasted weeks before being discovered. The sound of a Nephilim's footsteps approaching, a rhythmic trembling that made the water vibrate inside the pitchers, was the last thing many families heard before the roof of their homes was ripped off as if it were a sheet of paper. And when the humans weren't enough, the Nephilim devoured each other, giant against giant, in battles that made entire mountains tremble. Blood flowed through the valleys like crimson rivers. The smell of death and decomposition permeated the air for dozens of kilometers, and the cry of the earth, but the accumulated scream of millions of massacred innocents, rose up to heaven like a wail that shook the foundations of the Most High's throne. The archangels heard it. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel looked down from the heights and saw the earth drenched in blood. They saw the destroyed villages, the ravaged fields, the rivers stained red. They saw the Nephilim massacring entire families as if crushing insects. And they saw the Watchers observing everything from their improvised thrones in the mountains, surrounded by their human wives, without a drop of remorse on their immortal faces. And the archangels could not contain themselves. They presented themselves before the Most High with an urgency that heaven had rarely witnessed. Raphael spoke first. "Lord, look at what Azazel has done. Look at how he has taught all injustice upon the earth and has revealed the eternal secrets that were wrought in the heavens." Gabriel continued, "The bastards, the reprobate, the children of the watchers, oppress and destroy men. And the earth cries out before you from the blood of the innocents shed upon it." Michael closed, "All the earth has been corrupted by the works that Azazel taught. To him attribute all sin." And the Most High answered. And his answer was a decree that would change the destiny of the earth forever. But that answer was not only for the archangels. It was also for a man of dust who walked upright in the midst of chaos, a man who was about to receive the most extraordinary mission in human history. And it was in the midst of this hell, in the midst of this cosmic carnage, where the border between the human and the demonic had been erased, that God set his eyes on a single man, a man who walked upright when his entire generation had twisted itself beyond recognition, a man who refused to participate in the collective madness, and he said something that would change his life forever. "Come, Enoch, I'm going to show you what no human eye has ever seen." What awaited him above would surpass everything his mind could conceive. But first, there was something Enoch needed to understand about himself, something that not even he knew yet. But before I tell you what Enoch saw in the heavens, you need to know something that completely changes the reading of everything that follows. Enoch didn't ask to be a prophet. He didn't seek visions. He didn't climb a mountain to meditate for 40 days. He didn't fast until he hallucinated. He didn't practice rituals of any kind. He simply walked with God. That phrase seems simple, but it contains the deepest secret of all biblical spirituality. And when I say the deepest, I want you to understand the weight of what I'm saying. In a world where the watchers offered forbidden knowledge and everyone lined up to receive it, where the war technology Azazel taught was the currency of power among the tribes, where the cosmetics and precious stones the fallen angels revealed had transformed human relationships into transactions of manipulation, where the spells and invocations the 200 instructed had replaced prayer as the primary way of seeking the supernatural. In that world, walking with God meant rejecting everything your civilization considered progress. It meant being the village fool, the outdated one, the one who clings to an invisible God when there are 200 visible gods walking among the mountains and handing out technological miracles with both hands. Sound familiar? Do you know that feeling of being the only one who thinks differently? Of being surrounded by people who look at you as if you're crazy for believing what you believe? Of feeling that the whole world marches in one direction and you're going in the opposite? Enoch lived that multiplied by 1,000. Because in his case, those who marched in the opposite direction had supernatural powers. They had technology from another world. They had giants on their side, and Enoch only had God. And it turned out that God was enough, and more than enough. One night, while Enoch slept in his tent, with the distant sound of the Nephilim destroying something in some nearby valley, with the smell of smoke from burning villages seeping through the seams of the leather, the sky tore open above his head. It's not a metaphor. The manuscript describes it with a literalness that makes every hair on the body stand on end. The darkness of night turned into midday in an instant so violent that Enoch thought the sun had exploded. The fabric of the tent became translucent, the shadows disappeared, and two beings appeared, enormous, radiant. Their faces shone like the desert sun at high noon. Their eyes burned like lit torches, and the heat that emanated from their bodies was so intense that Enoch felt the sweat covering his back before he had even fully opened his eyes. And then they told him, "Fear not, Enoch. The Eternal has sent us. Today you will be taken before his presence. Today you will see what has been hidden since the foundation of the world." What begins from this moment is the most detailed account of the celestial world that exists in all ancient literature. More detailed than Isaiah, who saw the throne and the seraphim. More extensive than Ezekiel, who saw the glory and the living wheels. More specific than John on Patmos, who saw the open heaven and the events of the end. Because Enoch didn't see fragments, Enoch saw the complete system, every level, every function, every inhabitant, from the base to the summit. The two angels took him, one on each side, and lifted him. Enoch felt how his feet stopped touching the earth, how the air became colder, cleaner, denser with something he couldn't name, but that smelled like no flower on earth has ever smelled. The mountains became small below. The rivers turned into threads of silver. The cries of violence that filled the world faded until they became absolute silence, the silence of heaven. A silence that was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something infinitely greater than sound. And he crossed the border of the visible. The first heaven received him with a revelation that demolished everything he believed he knew about nature. He saw infinite stores of snow and ice awaiting the divine command to descend. Chambers where the winds are contained until the exact second they must be released. Storehouses of dew and rain perfectly catalogued, and angels assigned to each star, to each storm, to each season of the year. And Enoch understood in a flash that every phenomenon science calls random is regulated by intelligent beings who obey precise orders. Every dawn has a celestial administrator. Every change of season has a director. Nothing in the universe is a product of chance. Absolutely nothing, but they didn't allow him to stay. "Go higher," the angels told him, and they lifted him to the second heaven. And here is where Enoch saw something that tore the tears from his eyes and froze his blood to the bone. Angels chained in absolute darkness, cosmic prisoners suspended in a void of darkness so dense it seemed solid, so dense that Enoch felt he could touch it with his hands, that he could grab the darkness as if it were fabric. No light, not a single photon of hope, not a sound except the endless moaning of those who had lost everything. And the cold was so penetrating that Enoch felt the muscles of his face stiffening just from being nearby. A cold that didn't come from outside, but from inside. A cold that was the total absence of God's presence. And if you've ever felt true loneliness, multiply it by infinity, and you'll be close to understanding what these beings experienced every second of their eternal existence. These beings who once shone like stars of the dawn, who once flew between dimensions with the speed of thought, who once sang before the throne of the Most High with voices that made the pillars of heaven vibrate, now hung in chains made of a material that doesn't exist on the terrestrial periodic table. Chains that were not made of metal, but of divine decree, and unbreakable not because of their physical composition, but because of the authority of the one who pronounced them, waiting for a judgment that would determine their destiny for all eternity. They were watchers, those who had descended to Mount Hermon, those who had taken human wives, those who had fathered Nephilim and revealed secrets that should never have left heaven. And when they saw Enoch, a human being, an insignificant mortal walking through their prison accompanied by angels of light, they did something no one would expect from beings of their cosmic category. They begged him, with voices that sounded like wind passing through an empty cavern, with words that crawled like a wounded animal seeking shelter. They asked a man of dust to intercede for them before the Most High, to bring their case to the throne, to present a petition for mercy, to give them a chance that they knew in the deepest part of their immortal being they probably didn't deserve. Stop for a second and absorb this. Why would an angel ask a human for help? What does a being of dust possess that a being of light doesn't? The answer changes everything you think you know about your position in the cosmos. Angels were created as servants. Humans were created as children. And a child has access to the Father that a servant will never have, no matter how long they've served in the house. The fallen angels knew this, and Enoch, moved to the marrow, agreed to take their petition to the throne. But the answer he would receive would not be what they expected, not even close. In the third heaven, Enoch was left speechless, literally. And the manuscript says he could not speak for a period of time he couldn't measure, because what he saw was too much, too beautiful, too perfect, too impossible for a human brain accustomed to the ugliness of the corrupted world. He found paradise, not the Eden from which Adam was expelled, not a copy, the original, the celestial model of which the Garden of Genesis was merely a pale shadow, trees whose fragrance penetrated not just the nose, but the soul, an aroma that dissolved anxiety, fear, pain, like the light of dawn dissolves darkness, a river of milk and honey that flowed with no visible source and no apparent destination, fed by the very presence of the Creator. Fruits of colors that don't exist on any terrestrial light spectrum, hung from branches that swayed with a breeze that sang. Not a breeze that sounded like singing, but a breeze that literally sang words of praise in a language Enoch didn't know but understood with perfect clarity. And in the exact center of that garden, guarded by cherubim with swords of fire that spun without ceasing, stood the tree of life. The same tree from which Adam was separated 5,000 years ago, the one that grants immortality, the one that waits patiently for the day when the righteous are restored. But what Enoch discovered next took his breath away for completely opposite reasons. The north of the third heaven is an abyss, darkness and fire coexisting in a way that defies every known law of physics. Cold that penetrates to the marrow of the soul and flames that burn without consuming anything. A place so horrifying that Enoch could barely sustain his gaze. And the angels told him with a voice that allowed no argument, "This place is prepared for those who dishonor the Creator, for those who practice iniquity upon the earth, for those who know the truth and deliberately reject it." Paradise and hell in the same heaven, separated by an invisible but absolute border, and Enoch understood something that very few theologians dare to say out loud. The same God who prepares an indescribable beauty for those who love him, prepares an inescapable judgment for those who reject him, because love that cannot judge injustice is not love. It is indifference, and Enoch's God is not indifferent. The fourth heaven opened his eyes in a way that modern science has not yet reached, and probably won't reach for the next 100 years. Enoch saw the mechanisms that govern the cosmos, and they were not what you'd expect. They weren't gears, they weren't mathematical formulas floating in the void. They were living beings executing functions with a precision that would make NASA engineers weep with envy. Chariots of fire, not as metaphor but as actual vehicles of pure energy, transporting the solar luminary from east to west. 12 gates of the east from which the sun emerges each morning, rotating month by month according to a calendar drawn before the concept of time existed, and 12 gates of the west through which it sets each evening. Enoch counted the gates, observed the rotations, measured the cycles, and what he discovered is that the celestial calendar administered by the angels has exactly 364 days, divided into 4 seasons of 91 days each. A perfect solar calendar that needs no corrections or leap years, a system that precedes the Egyptian calendar, the Babylonian, the Roman, all systems of time measurement that humanity has invented. Because Enoch didn't see a human invention, he saw the original design from which all others are imperfect copies, and the angels sang while they operated these mechanisms. They didn't sing like someone sings in the shower out of boredom. They sang because each solar cycle is an act of worship. Every sunrise is not a mechanical phenomenon produced by the rotation of the earth around a star. It is an offering. Every sunset is a prayer. Every lunar cycle is a hymn. Every changing season is a verse in a cosmic poem that all creation recites before its maker since the first day. Think about that the next time you see the sunrise. But what you're seeing is not physics, it is worship, and there are beings assigned to make that moment happen exactly when and how it should. And Enoch understood something that modern humanity has almost completely forgotten. Something that can change your way of seeing the universe forever. The universe is not a machine, it is a temple. Every galaxy is a nave, every star is a lamp, every planet is an altar. Science can measure the distances with decimal precision. It can calculate the velocities with millisecond accuracy. It can predict eclipses decades in advance. But Enoch saw what science cannot see and probably never will see with its current instruments. The intention, the purpose, the reason for being of every particle, every wave, every force. He saw the architect behind the architecture. And the difference between knowing the plans of a building and personally knowing the one who designed them is the difference between accumulating information and possessing wisdom. And that difference, that seemingly small gap, changes absolutely everything. But what he found in the fifth heaven took him completely by surprise. He expected more glory, more cosmic revelations, more supernatural wonders. What he found was pain. A pain so pure, so concentrated, so visceral, that it brought him to his knees. Angels who were not chained like those of the second heaven, but who were not free either. Watchers who had participated in the rebellion of Mount Hermon, but who, unlike the most aggressive ones, were consumed by something worse than chains. They were consumed by remorse. Their faces, which once shone like stars, were dimmed, like a lamp that's had its current cut. Their wings, which once traversed entire dimensions with the grace of a ray of light, were folded against their bodies like the sails of a ship abandoned on a windless sea. Their glory was withered, like a rose torn from its root, slowly dying in an empty vase, and they wept, in silence. A silence more eloquent than any scream you've ever heard. A silence of shame so deep it made the walls of the fifth heaven vibrate. They didn't weep for the punishment. They wept because they had betrayed the one who created them, because they had traded eternity for a passing desire, because they understood, too late, that what they lost was infinitely more valuable than anything they gained. And Enoch did something extraordinary. He didn't judge them. He didn't condemn them. He didn't say, "You deserve it." He spoke to them with compassion. He read them prayers he had written, and he told them, "Lift your voices. Don't let the shame of the past destroy what remains of your present. Offer the Creator the only thing you have left, a broken heart." And the fallen angels, upon hearing the words of a mortal, of a being of dust, who by all logic should be inferior to them in every sense, lifted their voices, and they sang, a broken song, imperfect, trembling like the voice of a child who has cried all night, a song that didn't have the perfection of the celestial choirs, but that came from a place deeper than perfection. It came from genuine repentance, and that song resonated through the heavens like distant thunder, and Enoch wept with them. Because he understood a truth that few theologies dare to pronounce. The pain of repentance is not exclusive to humans. Even beings of light can fall. Even bearers of glory can become lost. And the Creator's mercy is an ocean without a bottom. What came next would require from Enoch something he had never been asked for before. Absolute courage. The sixth heaven crushed him. There is no other word. It crushed him. Here resided the archangels, the seven supreme spirits who remain eternally in the direct presence of the Most High. And when Enoch saw them, his body could not sustain itself. He fell on his face not out of religious protocol. He fell because every cell of his mortal body screamed that he didn't belong in that place, that the distance between what he was and what they were was infinite, unbridgeable. Gabriel, the one who thousands of years later would tell a young virgin in Nazareth, "You will conceive by the Holy Spirit." Michael, the supreme warrior who one day will wage the final battle against the forces of darkness. Raphael, the healer who keeps the secrets of the restoration of everything that sin has destroyed, Uriel, the guardian of fire and cosmic light, each one with an authority that made the powers of the entire created universe tremble. And it was these archangels who told him something that must have terrified and fascinated him in equal parts. Be strong, Enoch. What you are about to see now, no human being born of woman has ever witnessed. No prophet, no patriarch, no king. What is behind the door we are about to open is the source of everything that exists. And then they did something irreversible to him. They stripped him of his earthly clothes, stained with dust and sweat. They covered him with a material that seemed woven from threads of pure light. They anointed his face with an oil that shone like molten metal, but was cool as spring water. And they removed every vestige of mortality from him, every wrinkle, every mark of time, every evidence that this man had aged a single day. Enoch looked at his hands, and what he saw left him breathless. They were no longer the calloused, weathered hands of an aged patriarch. They were translucent, radiant, immortal, the hands of a being of light, and the door of the seventh heaven opened. What Enoch saw on the other side defies everything that human language can describe. The words are too small, the concepts are too limited, but the manuscript tries, and this is what it says. He saw a throne, but to call what he saw a throne is like calling the ocean a puddle, a structure of impossible dimensions whose top was lost in a light so concentrated that sight could not reach it, surrounded by fire, not a fire that destroys, a fire that sings, a fire that is the visible manifestation of absolute holiness, and around it, in concentric circles extending as far as perception could reach, millions of celestial beings worshipped without ceasing. The seraphim covered their faces with 2 of their 6 wings. Not even they, beings created specifically for perpetual worship, could sustain the direct gaze of the one who sat on the throne. With 2 others they covered their feet in a sign of total reverence, and with the remaining 2 they flew, singing the most ancient words of the universe. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts, and the whole earth is full of his glory. And on that throne Enoch saw the great king, the Ancient of Days, his hair white as the purest wool, not the white of old age, the white of eternity, the white that exists before colors are created. His face shone like 1,000 suns, concentrated in a single point. His garment was brighter than snow, purer than crystal, more luminous than the 6 previous heavens combined. And from his mouth came a word, and that word created, judged, governed, gave life, pronounced death. It was the beginning and the end of everything that exists. And Enoch knew, not with his mind, but with every atom of his transformed being, that he was at the gravitational center of all reality, at the source, at the origin, at the point from which everything began and toward which everything converges. Udan the Most High spoke to him directly, without angelic intermediaries, without symbolic visions, like a father who speaks to a son who walked a long road to find him. And he told him, "Fear not, Enoch. Rise and stand before my face forever, forever." That was not a temporary invitation. It was an eternal decree. Enoch would not return to die like the others. Enoch would remain. But before eternity closed around him, before that forever began, there was something more he needed to see. And what he was about to witness is, without a doubt, the most explosive, most controversial, most silenced passage of the entire book. Because what Enoch saw in the 7th heaven, thousands of years before Bethlehem, thousands of years before the manger, thousands of years before an angel told Mary she would conceive by the Holy Spirit, it was the Son of Man. And the description is unmistakable for anyone who has read the New Testament. The manuscript records it in chapters 37 through 71, the section scholars call the Parables of Enoch. Enoch saw a being whose face had the appearance of a man, human features, recognizable traits, but whose presence emanated exactly the same glory that radiated from the throne of the Most High. A being who was not created, who had no beginning, who existed before the first ray of light cut through the darkness of the abyss, before the stars were lit, before the foundations of the earth were laid, before the very concept of before had any meaning. Enoch, trembling, asked the angel who accompanied him, "Who is this? Why does he walk beside the Ancient of Days as an equal? Why do the seraphim render him the same reverence as the one who sits on the throne?" And the answer should shake the foundations of every Christological debate of the last 2,000 years. The angel told him, "This is the Son of Man, in whom all righteousness dwells, who reveals all the treasures of what is hidden, because the Lord of spirits has chosen him, and his portion has surpassed all in righteousness forever." But that's not all. The manuscript continues, "This Son of Man was named before the Lord of spirits, before the sun and constellations were created, before the stars of heaven were formed. His name was spoken in the presence of the Most High before the beginning of the world. He was chosen and hidden in the divine presence before time began. He was given supreme authority to judge the living and the dead. All the kings and powerful of the earth will fall before him, and the righteous will live under his protection forever and ever." Read that again if you need to, because what you're reading is the testimony of a man who lived before the universal flood, describing with millimetric exactitude Jesus of Nazareth, not as just another prophet, not as a moral teacher, not as a social reformer, but as the eternal judge, the pre-existing being, the co-regent of the Most High, seated at his right hand since before the foundation of the cosmos, thousands of years before Bethlehem, thousands of years before the cross, thousands of years before the resurrection. Christology was not invented in the 1st century. It was revealed from before the flood, and it was hidden. And the question that should keep you awake tonight is, by whom? And for what purpose? But before answering that question, Enoch had a mission, the most difficult of his life. He had to descend, leave the glory of the 7th heaven, abandon the throne and the seraphim, return to the corrupted earth, and deliver to the watchers a message that contained not a single word of hope. Enoch presented himself before Semyaza and the 200, the same ones who had sworn on Mount Hermon, the same ones who had abandoned heaven for carnal desire, and they could see him. They could see the radiance of the 7th heaven on his face. They could feel the authority of the Most High vibrating in every syllable he was about to utter, and the terror paralyzed them, because they knew with the instinctive certainty of spiritual beings that the news was devastating. And Enoch read them their sentence. Listen to it. Because it has no parallel in any other sacred text of the ancient world. He told them, "You were in heaven, but the secrets had not been revealed to you. Yet you knew a worthless secret, and in the hardness of your hearts you shared it with the women. And through that secret, women and men multiply evil upon the earth, and the condemnation. You who were holy spirits, living an eternal life, contaminated yourselves with mortal blood. You desired the flesh of humans and produced flesh and blood as those who die do. That is why I gave wives to humans, so that in them they would sow and have children. But you from the beginning were made spiritual, immortal for all generations. That is why I did not provide you with wives. Because the dwelling of spiritual beings is heaven, the implications are enormous. And God did not improvise the separation between the celestial and the terrestrial. He designed it into the very structure of reality. Humans were created for reproduction and conjugal relationships. Angels were not. Not because sexuality is inferior, but because each type of being was designed with a specific purpose, and mixing those purposes produces monstrosities. The Nephilim were living proof. The sentence was definitive. The watchers would be chained beneath the hills of the earth for 70 generations, in darkness and fire, until the final judgment. Their children, the Nephilim, would destroy each other, and the forbidden knowledge they revealed would be the seed of the flood. Because the flood was not just water falling from the sky, it was the direct consequence of what the Watchers unleashed. A cosmic reset. And an erase and start over, and the Watchers trembled, not with human fear, with cosmic terror, the terror of an immortal being who understands that their immortality doesn't protect them from judgment, that eternity can be spent in chains, and that there is no appeal, no second chance, no escape. And Enoch, the man of dust, was the one who pronounced their eternal condemnation, a human judging angels, a mortal sentencing immortals, the most radical inversion of the cosmic order you can imagine, and yet completely consistent with what Paul would write thousands of years later. Do you not know that we will judge angels? But the book doesn't end here, and what follows may be the most disturbing of all. Enoch received visions that extend to the end of human history, prophecies written before the flood that, when you read them sitting in your house in the middle of the 21st century with apocalyptic news on your phone screen, force you to ask, how is this humanly possible? In the section called The Vision of the Animals, Enoch saw all of human history represented in symbols: white bulls that are the patriarchs, sheep that are Israel, wolves and lions that are the oppressor empires, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, each one identifiable, each one with their exact role in the cosmic drama. And in the center, a lamb that transforms into a great animal with enormous horns, the Messiah, the Son of Man that Enoch saw alongside the Ancient of Days, now manifesting in the arena of history. But the most chilling prophecies are in the Epistle of Enoch, where the tone changes from narrative to direct confrontation, where Enoch looks through the millennia directly into your eyes and says, "This is for you." He wrote, "A time will come when lies will be called truth, and the truth will be classified as dangerous, as intolerant, as an obstacle to progress." When was the last time you saw that happen? Yesterday? This morning? 5 minutes ago while checking the news on your phone? A time will come when the righteous will be persecuted, not despite their righteousness, but because of it. And the wicked will be exalted and celebrated for their ability to present wickedness as virtue. Look at social media. Look at who is celebrated. Look at who is cancelled. Look at who receives awards and who receives threats. And then tell me that Enoch didn't describe your reality 5,000 years in advance. Indeed, the rich will accumulate treasures without measure and build mansions on foundations of injustice, and will genuinely believe that their wealth protects them from all consequences. But when judgment comes, their gold will not buy a single second more of life. Their silver will not bribe the judge who sits on the throne. Their investments will evaporate like dew under the midday sun. The powerful will build fortresses and surveillance systems and armies and political alliances and weapons of mass destruction, and will believe they are safe against every conceivable threat. But there is no wall, no technology, no artificial intelligence, no army that can withstand the eternal when he decides that the time of patience has ended. Think about that. Enoch described weapons of mass destruction, surveillance systems, and obscene accumulation of wealth, 5,000 years before any of those things existed in the form they exist today. How did he do it? Was he a genius of statistical prediction? Did he get lucky? Or did someone who sees the end from the beginning show him exactly what was going to happen? And those who walk with God in those days will be like strangers in their own land, ridiculed in the public squares, marginalized from the important conversations, They will be called fanatics for believing what their grandparents believed, ignorant for rejecting what the majority accepts without questioning, backward for insisting that there is a truth that doesn't change according to the cultural fashion of the moment. They will be excluded. They will be silenced. They will be painted as the problem that prevents the progress of humanity. But let them not be discouraged, because their names are written on celestial tablets that no human hand can touch, no government decree can erase, no algorithm can censor. And when everything the world has built with so much pride, with so much arrogance, with so much certainty of its own immortality, crumbles like dust before the wind of judgment, they will remain. Because the foundation of their life is not visible, it is not earthly, it is not temporal, it doesn't depend on the economy or politics or technology. Their foundation is eternal, and the eternal, by absolute and irrevocable definition, cannot be destroyed. A man who lived 5,000 years ago described with surgical precision the society in which you are living right now. The systematic inversion of values, the organized persecution of truth, the industrial worship of money, the false security of military and technological power, the progressive marginalization of believers, and the unbreakable comfort for those who resist. Coincidence? Good intuition from an ancient writer, or genuine revelation from the God who sees the end from the beginning? And here we arrive at the question that has been beating beneath this entire account. The question that has probably accompanied you since the first minute. If this book was so revered, if it was cited in the New Testament, if it contains prophecies that are fulfilled with millimetric precision, if it preserves the most ancient revelation of the Son of Man as pre-existing God, then why was it removed? Who decided you shouldn't read it? And the answer has 4 layers, and each one is worse than the last. First layer, theological. The Book of Enoch presents a cosmology that is too detailed. Names of angels, hierarchies, functions, locations, mechanisms of judgment, everything catalogued with engineering precision, and that deeply unsettles those who prefer the celestial to remain vague and abstract. When everything is specifically described, the space for interpretive manipulation reduces to 0. Second layer, ecclesiastical. The book teaches that an ordinary man who walks with God can receive direct revelation from the throne, without priests, without temples, without prescribed liturgy, without hierarchies that decide who can know what. For a church that in the 4th century was consolidating its power structure, this idea was dynamite. If any believer could access the throne like Enoch, the inevitable question was devastating. What do we need the institution for? Third layer, occultist. The book reveals too much about how evil operates, specific names of entities, demonic hierarchies, strategies, points of access. And there were those who argued that this information in the wrong hands wouldn't be used to combat evil, but to contact it, to invoke, to negotiate. The church decided it was safer to hide the map than to risk someone using it to reach the wrong destination. But the 4th layer is the one no one mentions, and it is the most revealing of all. The Book of Enoch identifies the Son of Man as a pre-existing being, eternal, co-regent with the Most High, thousands of years before Christ. This means that the divinity of Jesus was not invented by Paul. It was not elaborated in the ecumenical councils. It was not the result of a gradual process of mythification where a charismatic rabbi was slowly elevated to divine status. No, the identity of Christ as God was revealed and documented from before the flood, from before Abraham, from before Moses, from before Isaiah, and that shuts the door with a padlock on every current that tries to reduce Jesus to a simple moral teacher or just another prophet. If Enoch is right, Jesus didn't become God. Jesus was always God, and humanity knew it from the beginning, and someone made sure we would forget it. Who benefits from you forgetting that? The book ends with something that is simultaneously a conclusion and an open door. Enoch returns. After traversing the seven heavens, after seeing the throne, after contemplating the Son of Man, and after pronouncing judgment on the watchers, after receiving the prophecies of the end, he returns to the earth. He returns to his family. He returns to Methuselah, his son, the man who would live more years than any other human being in the Bible. 969 years, and whose death, according to rabbinic tradition, coincides exactly with the year of the flood. And what Enoch tells his son is not a theological lecture. It is the farewell of a father who knows he will not return. It is an eternal testament compressed into the last words he will utter on this earth. And if you are a father, or if you are a son, what follows will pierce you like a spear. Imagine the scene. An elder who no longer looks elderly because his face still radiates the glow of the seventh heaven. Seated before his son Methuselah, and who looks at him with eyes that mix wonder, confusion, and an anticipated grief that he cannot articulate with words. Because Methuselah knows. He knows that his father is going to leave. He knows this is the last time, and there is nothing he can do to prevent it. And Enoch takes his son's hands, the same hands he held when he was a small child, the same hands he taught to use for building, for planting, for praying, and with a voice that trembles not from weakness, but from the intensity of what he needs to communicate, he tells him, "My son, I have seen everything. I have seen the glory that sets the heavens ablaze with a light that would make the sun of this world pale. And I have seen the horror that makes the abysses tremble with a darkness that penetrates deeper than any night. And I have seen the throne, where the destiny of every soul that has existed and every soul that will exist is decided. I have seen mercy and justice embracing like sisters who have been separated for centuries. And after everything these eyes have witnessed, after traversing seven heavens and seeing things I have no words to describe, the only thing, the absolute only thing I can tell you is this: walk straight, walk with God. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, no matter how many tell you you're wrong, walk with God. Because everything else, absolutely everything this world offers, everything that glitters and seduces and promises happiness and security and power, is dust. It is vapor. It is the shadow of a shadow. And it is nothing compared to what awaits you if you stay the course. Do not be deceived by those who say there is no judgment. I have seen it, my son. It is real. It is certain. It is as inevitable as the dawn that comes after every night. Do not be seduced by those who say that the secrets of heaven are for a chosen few, for a spiritual elite, for those who pay a special price. They are for everyone who seeks with a sincere heart. Everyone who knocks, the door is open to them. Do not be intimidated by those who persecute those who speak truth. Their days are numbered in the celestial book with the same precision with which the stars of the firmament are counted. And when the number is fulfilled, the Lord will act, and there is no power in heaven, on earth, or beneath the earth that can stay his hand when he decides to move. And Methuselah wept, because he understood that he was hearing the last words of his father, and because in those words there was more truth, more weight, more compressed eternity than in anything he had heard in his entire life. And he embraced his father, and that embrace was the last physical contact between them in this world. And after transmitting everything, after making sure that every word was engraved on clay tablets and copied onto scrolls with the precision of one who transcribes the testament of heaven, Enoch was taken. For the last time. He didn't die. He didn't fall ill. He was lifted up, transferred from the visible to the eternal in an instant. As Genesis says, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. But his words remained. It copied from Hebrew to Aramaic, from Aramaic to Greek, from Greek to Ethiopian Ge'ez, guarded for millennia in monasteries carved into the mountains of northern Africa by monks who perhaps didn't completely understand what they were protecting, but sensed it was sacred. Found in 1773 by the Scottish explorer James Bruce, who traveled to the mountains of Ethiopia following rumors that the monks guarded sacred texts that the rest of the Christian world had lost. When Bruce finally had the copies in his hands, when he unrolled the scrolls and saw what they contained, his own words were, "This changes everything we thought we knew." He brought 3 copies to Europe. One went to the Royal Library of France, another to the Bodleian Library at Oxford. The third he kept himself, and for 50 years almost no one paid them any attention. And until 1821, when Richard Lawrence, professor of Hebrew at the University of Oxford, decided to translate the complete text into English. The process took him years. Every page presented linguistic challenges that no scholar of his generation had faced. But when he finished, when he read his own translation from beginning to end, he understood that he was looking at one of the most significant documents in the history of religious literature. A document that had been hidden in plain sight for centuries. And then came the definitive confirmation. In 1947, a 15-year-old Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Ed-Dib was searching for a lost goat in the cliffs of Qumran by the Dead Sea. He threw a stone into a cave to scare the animal, and instead of the bleating of a goat, he heard something that would change biblical archaeology forever, the sound of pottery breaking. He entered the cave, and inside jars sealed with pitch for more than 2,000 years, he found scrolls of parchment wrapped in linen cloth. The Dead Sea Scrolls, the most important archaeological discovery of the 20th century. And among those scrolls, written in Aramaic on goatskin with vegetable carbon ink, were fragments of the Book of Enoch. Fragments that scientists dated to the 2nd century before Christ, at minimum. Fragments that irrefutably proved that the text was not a medieval fabrication, as some critics had suggested. It was genuinely ancient, predating Jesus, predating the Romans, predating all the Christological debate that had dominated 2,000 years of religious history. The Book of Enoch did not disappear. It was kept, preserved by the providence of the same God who inspired it, through empires that rose and fell, through civilizations that flourished and were extinguished, through wars that ravaged continents, through centuries of deliberate silence, kept for a specific moment, for a specific generation. And if you're hearing this now, perhaps that generation is you. We live in a time that Enoch described with the precision of someone who looks through a window and describes what they see. Lies disguise themselves as progress. Truth is classified as dangerous speech. Those who walk with God are portrayed as relics of a dark age. Technological knowledge multiplies exponentially, but the wisdom to use it has evaporated. Enoch lived something similar. The knowledge of the Watchers didn't make humanity wiser. It made them more efficient in their capacity for destruction, more sophisticated in their methods of manipulation, further from their Creator with each discovery. Because knowledge without the fear of God is an unsheathed sword in the hands of a sleepwalker. Eventually it cuts the one who carries it, but in the midst of that destroyed world, Enoch walked. He didn't run, he didn't flee, he didn't build a spiritual bunker. He walked. Step by step, day by day, in a direction no one else was following, and God saw him, and God honored him, and God lifted him up, not because he was perfect, but because in a world that had let go of the Creator's hand, Enoch held on, and he never let go. The question this book asks you is not historical, it's not academic, it's not theological in the abstract sense, it is brutally personal. Will you walk in the midst of this chaos, in the midst of this darkness that intensifies every day, in the midst of this social pressure that screams at you to conform, to not be radical, to not take faith so seriously? Will you walk with God? Because the promise still stands. It has not expired. Those who walk with the Eternal need not fear the judgment. Those who seek his face need not fear the darkness. Those who cling to his truth need not fear the end. The same God who took Enoch before the flood promises to preserve his own before the final judgment. The same hand that lifted a man of dust to the seventh heaven extends toward you today. And the question is not whether God is willing. He always has been. The question is whether you are willing to walk. The book of Enoch was hidden for centuries, but what God hides, only he hides to reveal it at the exact moment. And if something inside you stirred with what you heard today, if something resonated like a string that has been struck after years of silence, then this is your moment. This book was preserved 5,000 years to reach you today, because Enoch left a message that pierces through the millennia like an arrow that doesn't lose its force. A message that Jude quoted verbatim in his epistle. A message that says, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all and to convict all the ungodly of all their works of ungodliness." Those words were written before the flood. They were quoted in the 1st century, and they will be fulfilled when the Son of Man that Enoch saw seated beside the Ancient of Days returns, not as a baby in a manger, not as a humble carpenter, not as a prisoner on the way to the cross, but as the judge of all the earth, with the fire of justice in his eyes, with the authority of the cosmos in his voice, with 10,000 saints at his side, and with the mercy of eternity in his hands. And on that day, those who walked like Enoch will be lifted like Enoch. Those who resisted against the current will be honored like Enoch. Those who believed what the world discarded will be vindicated before all creation. The book of Enoch is no longer hidden. The truth can no longer be buried. The question is no longer whether you know it. You've heard it today, complete, without filters, without censorship. The only question that remains is what you will do with it.